A good point. I'm glad you added that. Buzz Aldrin from our Los Angeles Bureau, thanks. We're going to go back to our correspondent, Jay Barbary. It's important to for us to remember, Jay, the people who made up this crew, and perhaps for those Americans, again, who haven't been following the space program, aren't conversant with the backgrounds and biographies of these crew members, you could go through them for us.
Okay, Brian, Rick Husband. He's 45 years old, a colonel in the U.S. Air Force. This was his second flight. He flew back in December 1994 on STS-96. This was STS-107. And Rick was at the controls when they were coming in. He was the commander of the flight. And he's a colonel in the U.S. Air Force. Sitting in the right seat was Willie C. McCool. He's 40 years old, a commander in the U.S. Navy. Of course, he's a former test pilot also. He was a rookie. This was his first flight. And the payload commander was Michael P. Anderson. Michael is a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. He's 42 years old, and he flew before on STS-89 in 1998, which was the 8th shuttle Mir docking mission. Anderson had logged over 211 hours in space before he went up. Mission Specialist 1 was David M. Brown, 46, a captain in the Navy. He's a naval aviator also, and this was his first space flight. He was a rookie. Another veteran on board was born in India. Her name is Kalpana Chawla, spelled a little different, spelled Kalpana, Chawla, pronounced Kalpana Chawla. Because they had trouble with it, most crew members called her KC. This was her second flight, and she was Mission Specialist 2. Mission Specialist 4 was Laura Blair Salton Clark. Now, Laurel Clark, 41, a commander in the U.S. Navy, she was making her first flight on board this 16-day experiment flight on board Columbia. Now, I want also to remind people that Columbia did not go to the International Space Station. It's the first flight in a couple of years that has gone up of a shuttle that didn't visit the International Space Station. The other crew member on board was the first Israeli astronaut. His name is Ilan Ramon. He's a colonel in the Israeli Air Force. He's a fighter pilot, and he was a payload specialist on this mission. We've heard a lot about him, and he's been training for 2 years to get up there. But those were the 7 people on board Columbia, Brian.
Jay, before I get to another guest who's been patient enough to wait for us, I have one question, and that is that when you come into contact with any member of NASA, any one of the astronauts, they are, as a rule, such impressive individuals. Spend a moment to tell us about the character required and the kind of swagger and bravery that is commonplace, everyday stuff to these folks.
Well, my friend Tom Wolfe wrote a book called The Right Stuff, and that pretty well put it in perspective. The original 7 astronauts, the Mercury astronauts, were extraordinary. Alan Shepard, our first man into space, he also flew Apollo 14, commanded it. He did it at a time after we had the near catastrophe with Apollo 13. He landed it on the moon. He was a graduate of the Naval Academy, as was our first man to go in orbit, John Glenn, who became a U.S. Senator from Ohio. All of these people were not only test pilots, but they were engineering. Most of them have degrees, PhDs. They're actually the best that this country has to offer, and it continues that way. Even though we have over 100 astronauts now, as the old saying goes, there's not a cull among them, and it is extremely hard to become an astronaut. I know people who have studied for years, who've taken additional courses, who've tried every time that NASA's naming new astronauts, and they didn't make it. As a matter of fact, the astronaut who flew the second mission to the moon, Pete Conrad, he was a commander of Apollo 12, he did not make the original cut of the 7. He was selected in the second cut, what they called the Gemini 9. That's how Pete got in, as did Jim Lovell, who is famous from the Apollo 13. He commanded the Apollo 13. Tom Stafford was also in that group, and Tom commanded Apollo 10, as well as a couple of Gemini flights. He also was the commander of Apollo Soyuz, the last Apollo mission, where they docked in July 1975. They docked in Earth orbit with the Russians for the first time. These are extraordinary people. They're the best this country or any country can produce. And we are only sending up our best in character and in knowledge when we send astronauts into space, Brian.
Jay, thanks for that. I think it's important that that thought be expressed. These are, to a person, extraordinary people. Jay Barbary, who we'll be going back to, of course, throughout the day. David Gregory is at the White House with more information. The president deciding to come back from Camp David today. David?
He has made that decision, Brian, and we're told he's about 15 minutes away. He'll be entering on the South grounds, either going into the residence or into the Oval Office. White House officials are here, the senior staff assembled, monitoring everything they can. The president, we're told, will make a statement to the American people at some point during the day, but not before NASA is able to draw some conclusions about this unfolding disaster. We have been told this morning by administration officials that while the investigation into any potential terrorist link is being fully investigated, that there's no indication that there was any foul play, no indication, as Jim Miklashevsky reported moments ago, that this is anything but an accident. We do in this country now have a Homeland Security Department that is operating at full speed today. The secretary of that department, Tom Ridge, got a call, we're told, by government officials shortly after NASA lost contact with Colombia. He's got a huge effort here in terms of coordinating the local response as well as the federal response. He and the president and his chief of staff, Andrew Card, in touch with Sean O'Keefe, who of course runs NASA. That call first made by the president at 10:30. The administration at lower levels has been in touch with the Israeli government. No call yet between the president and Prime Minister Sharon to exchange condolences. But back to the Homeland Security component, as I said, a massive effort underway. FEMA preparing to be the lead agency for recovery and response. The Coast Guard has been mobilized. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Ridge, has called the governors of Texas and Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, and I believe those are all the states, to coordinate the public safety function here. There is a debris field that is extremely dangerous that should be avoided by members of the public in those areas. So Tom Ridge coordinating that function as well. So to repeat, we're hearing it from Homeland Security officials, Brian. We're hearing it from other White House officials. There is no reason to believe that this is anything but an accident. The president just moments away from the White House now, monitoring this with his top team and preparing to address the country at some point today, once NASA gets more information, can draw some conclusions and communicate that with the president.